right, in that case, I'll go ahead and get started. So thank you, first of all, Jessica, and to AVTE for hosting this webinar and inviting me to speak to all of you. And thank you for everybody who's attending for giving me a little bit of your time. So today I'm going to talk about knowing your value in today's market. And in order to do that, I also wanted to talk a little bit about the evolution of recruiting, kind of how recruiting has evolved from, let's say, a good 10, 15 years ago to where it is today, and how that impacts your value and why knowing about that evolution is going to be important. So before I start, just a little bit about me. I am a former U.S. Marine Corps veteran and currently the founder and principal consultant of Higher Power Consulting. There's my email address in case anybody has questions after the fact and you want to email me, or you can call that number to reach me directly. And if you're on LinkedIn, you can connect with me there as well, okay? So a couple items that we're going to cover today, obviously the evolution of recruiting, the candidate and the employer, what you can do to help yourself and be more competitive. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we work, meaning Higher Power, the consulting company that I represent, and how we can help you. I'll talk about the future of hiring skilled talent, and I'll leave some time for closing remarks and any questions in case there are any. All right, now, one of the things I wanted to cover really quick throughout my presentation, you're going to see these images of people with their eyes closed and fingers crossed. And the reason I do that is because in the traditional hiring process, as you all know it, this is a lot of times how candidates feel. You'll apply for a job, you may find it online, and you submit your application, and next thing you know, you're crossing your fingers and hoping that somebody calls you. When they do, and you have that conversation, you're hoping that they invite you out for the interview. And when you do that, you're hoping that you get a great offer. So throughout the entire process, we constantly have our fingers crossed and we're hoping for something, because in the traditional process, you just don't know much about the end result, right? So back to the evolution of recruiting. I'm going to date myself here, but for those of you who may remember some of this, a long time ago, 15, 20 years ago, prior to the internet, all jobs were advertised in newspapers, right? There was the want ads section. Everybody would go there and you'd circle a job that interested you and you call that number and hope that somebody picked up. A lot of times people would just fax resumes to employers unsolicited, right? Fax machines would just be going off all the time. I can't even remember the last time I've seen a fax at this point. But again, that all has to do with where we were. And nowadays, I don't know anybody who advertises for jobs in an actual newspaper anymore. Interviewing rules have definitely changed. So the questions that you are allowed to ask a candidate is very different today than it was a long time ago. And as a candidate, it's important for you to know that, especially when let's say you're interviewing with a private practice that may not have been hiring for a good 10 years or something. It's important for you to know what questions can and can't be asked of you, right? And yeah, it may be awkward in the middle of an interview to kind of prompt that, but you're actually doing the employer a favor by doing so. So understanding those types of questions, what can be asked, is very important as well. Obviously, the internet and social media is the biggest evolution. Nowadays, employers have to, employers have to be able to provide an experience to their candidates. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on. But the reason why, one of the reasons, is that if you as a candidate go into an employer's office or their hospital and you have a bad experience, well, in a matter of minutes, you can communicate that to hundreds, if not thousands of people. Whereas, 15, 20 years ago, we couldn't do that. All right. So it's vitally important that they demonstrate good faith and provide a really good experience for you. Whether you get the job or not, that's irrelevant. The experience can still be very positive, right? We can still maintain a good network of folks, build bridges, whatever the case is. And who knows, if the opportunity doesn't work out this time, they may end up calling you back later. Okay, so a positive experience is extremely important, and the fact that we've got the internet and social media at our fingertips really kind of holds them accountable for that. All right. And then this last point, this shift to an on-demand society. All right, and I'm going to tie this into kind of how we work at Higher Power and how we utilize a very different process for you. But this shift to an on-demand society is real, right? Nowadays, when you order something online, you expect to see it within a day or two, right? How many people actually sit through commercials anymore? Right? We want to watch something, we pull it up online, and it's in front of us immediately. So everything seems to be going to an on-demand society, right? Even the food you order, you can shop from home from your local grocery store. So it's just the convenience and on-demand nature of today's society is a reality. And I think it's just going to continue to grow. And unfortunately, the recruiting or hiring process hasn't really adapted to that until now. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that towards the end of this presentation. So the candidate, right? How has the candidate evolved? Well, I'll tell you the FTE, which means full-time equivalent, isn't what it used to be, right? And what I'm referring to is generally a full-time equivalent is somebody who works a full 40 hours, right? Well, nowadays, what we're realizing is that the FTE has actually changed, right? So folks are expecting full-time work and full-time pay, but they're not necessarily putting exactly 40 hours of work into it, right? Is that good or bad? I'm not here to say, but that's something that employers need to adjust to, right? So that's something that they need to kind of ramp up their workforce planning. They need to understand their staffing levels better to accommodate this shift, right? Where folks are now demanding more of that work-life balance, so to speak, okay? More passive than active. And what I mean by that is the passive candidate is the one that already has a job, they're performing well in their role, but they're open to hearing about new opportunities, okay? The active candidate is the one who is actively going on the job boards and applying for positions. That person may or may not be actively employed, right? But they are seeking and aggressively seeking a new employment relationship for a myriad of reasons, okay? So both passive and active candidates require different types of recruiting strategies from employers, but they're also going to get different experiences through the process. So it's important to understand what type of candidate you are, right? When you're applying for, when you're engaging an employer in this recruiting process, okay? The leverage shift from employer to candidate. Now, this is an interesting one. So historically, employers always enjoyed a position of leverage in this recruiting process, right? They're the ones sitting on the other side of the table. They're the ones dictating when things are going to happen, how things are going to happen. They're the ones that are going to tell you what your offer is going to be at the very end, if you're lucky, right? Well, nowadays, especially in the veterinary industry for vet techs and veterinarians, that leverage is shifting towards the candidate. The unfortunate thing is that most candidates don't recognize it. They don't even realize it, okay? 9 out of 10 candidates that I work with, number one, really don't understand their value. And number two, don't understand their leverage in this relationship. And they don't know how to capitalize on it, okay? So it comes down to basic supply and demand, all right? If you think about it like that, then you'll really understand what I'm talking about, because the demand for your talent is as high as it's ever been, and it is getting higher by the day. The supply of your talent is relatively low compared to the demand. So when you have that type of relationship between supply and demand, well, something needs to give, right? And what that means is your value increases, all right? Now, again, the unfortunate part is that most vet techs and veterinarians just don't understand this. Well, it's not that they don't understand it, they just don't recognize it, right? It's not something that you're taught. It's not something that they're going to share with you in school, okay? It's something that I know because I've been in the recruiting space for over 20 years and I've seen the ebbs and flows, the peaks and valleys. And right now, the leverage is with the candidate. And that is something that all of you, when you're seeking that new position, you need to capitalize on that. And if you understand it and know how to use it, you absolutely will capitalize And lastly, there's this shift in career priorities, okay? And I spoke about work-life balance, and that's a major one, okay? People want to make sure that, burnout in this industry is real, all right? Compassion fatigue is real. And, the folks that get into this industry, they don't do it to get rich, right? We know that we're not in it to get rich. We're in it because we care about these animals and we care about, the work that we do. So this shift in career priorities is relatively important. It's extremely important, primarily because you want to find an employer who understands that, hey, you know what? Yes, I'm going to put 110% into my job. I'm going to do the very best I can to take care of my patients. But at the same time, I want an employer who's going to do the same for me, right? Who's going to take care of my interests, who's going to be concerned about burnout, who's going to be concerned about, the amount of time off that I get to recharge my batteries so that I can come back to work and give 110% again, okay? Now, as a candidate, it's your job to be able to articulate this type of stuff to the employer, all right? Good, thoughtful employers, they'll be the ones that'll tell you what they're going to do for you right up front without you having to ask, okay? But even if they don't, that doesn't mean that they're a bad employer or that you shouldn't choose them, okay? Again, just like interviewing is a skill for a candidate, it's a skill for the employer as well. And sometimes some employers just don't interview as often as others, right? And things fall through the cracks. It's not a negative, it's not a bad thing, but if you're aware of that and you can bring this point up, well then great, right? It really doesn't matter who brings it up. Obviously, as a candidate, I would love for the employer to be the one who shares it with me up front. But if I have to prompt them and ask the question, that's fine as well, as long as there's a thoughtful dialogue that occurs afterwards, all right? So the evolution of the employer is essentially the opposite, all right? So like I said, they no longer enjoy the leverage, okay? That position of leverage where they're kind of calling the shots, they don't get to enjoy that anymore. They have to be able to provide you with an experience, and I hinted on this earlier, right? Because in a market as competitive as ours, as a candidate, you're most likely going to see more than one employer, okay? You may interview 2, 3, sometimes 4 different employers. And considering all other things being equal, right? Let's say they all provide you a similar work-life balance. They provide you a similar offer, similar benefits, right? Considering all that tangible stuff is relatively equal, what the candidate is going to remember most is who gave them the best experience, right? And 9 times out of 10, that experience is going to win the candidate, okay? So what you as a candidate need to do is you need to pay very close attention to how you were treated throughout that process, okay? Because how you're treated throughout that process prior to becoming an employee for these people is a demonstration of what you're going to experience or what you're most likely to experience as an employee, okay? So speed, quality experience, and great offer is generally not enough. And this is something when I'm talking to employers, I always tell them, hey, you got to be able to move quickly, right? Competition is extremely steep in this industry, and whoever moves the quickest is going to secure the talent, right? So if you're working with an employer, and for whatever reason they had you scheduled for an interview, let's say this Wednesday, and then they call you and say, oh, well, Mary called in sick, so we have to do it next Wednesday. That's a problem. And I tell my employers not to do that. If their entire process is hinging on one person being there, right, a single point of failure, that's not a good process. And what's going to end up happening is, yeah, you may go ahead and reschedule, but somebody else is going to contact you and say, hey, we'd like to interview you tomorrow, or we want to interview you Thursday, whatever the case is, prior to this one being rescheduled. And you go there, you have a great experience, they make a great offer, you accept it right off the bat, and that first employer is now left in the dust, right? But speed, quality experience, great offer, like I said, it's not enough, because what candidates want to know today, which is something that's very important to them, is what makes you different? Why do I want to work here, right? So I tell employers they need to be able to articulate their differentiation from others, right? What makes them different from other employers? excuse me. And if they can do that very well, they can move their process along quickly, provide you with a great experience, give you an excellent offer, and then also articulate to you why you'd want to work there, what makes them different, chances are that's a great package and that's going to be one that gets accepted. All right. And then lastly, address the candidate's shift in career priorities. So I spoke about this one on the previous slide. I prefer that employers address this up front and don't wait for the candidate to ask. Okay. So again, I do a lot of these webinars, candidate audience, employer audience, and this is something that I tell all the employers that listen to me. The more forthcoming they are, the easier the process is for the candidate and the easier your decision making will become, okay? And that at the end result is what we want. We want to make your decision easy as the employer, right? We want to make the candidate's decision easy. So if they're able to do all these things, right? And like I said, they give you that great offer, they have the great benefits, they provide that work-life balance. Well, then they wrap all that up in a nice package with a bow on top. Chances are that's an offer that can get accepted. All right. So next topic is what you can do to kind of help yourself and differentiate yourself as a candidate and how we help. Oh, well, I'm sorry. This was the slide. I apologize. That last slide should be completed. Anyway, so what you can do to be more competitive. First of all, you need to, if you can, obtain as many additional skills or certificates as possible. FearFree is one of the best right now. All right, so I work closely with those folks. I know the founder of FearFree very well. He's a great guy, and he's just got an incredible organization out there. And I know for a fact that a lot of my employers are asking me for candidates that are FearFree certified. So if you're able to obtain that certification, I absolutely recommend it. Understand and be able to articulate the current market. Okay, what I mean by that is you should be able to go into a interview process or any type of employment engagement process already knowing what the market is in terms of compensation, right, for your specific geographic area, and for somebody of your level of experience and skill set. All right. Now, if you do that, it enables you to better negotiate that offer, right? Because a lot of times the employers are going to make you an offer for what they think you're worth, okay? Your job is to tell them what you are truly worth and articulate it with examples about why, okay? If you're able to do that, then that's how you open up a very level negotiating playing field, and you'll most likely be able to retain more value for your experience, okay? Throughout the interview process or the engagement process, right? When I say interview process, people think that I'm referring to just the actual physical interview. But the entire process itself, from the time you submit your application to the time you either accept or decline the offer, all of that is essentially an evaluation period, okay? And throughout that period, regardless of who you're talking with or what type of messages you're communicating with, whatever the case is, you should be able to articulate your experience with real examples, okay? The more you do that, the better off you'll be versus coming up with hypotheticals, because anybody can come up with a hypothetical, right? You could put me in any situation out there, ask me a question about it, and I'll be able to make something up hypothetically, all right? But if you can articulate an answer to their questions using a real life example of something that you did in the workplace, that is so much more impactful, and it's something that the employer will remember. The other thing is that it differentiates you. It sets you apart from your competition that isn't using those real examples, that is just coming off, giving answers off the cuff, all right? There, when you're competing for a position against multiple people, that's how you make yourself stand out, all right? Don't be afraid to ask for what you want. In my job right now, I realize that this happens more often than not. Now, I'm going to talk about my company and how we represent your interests. So this is one of the things that I talk to my candidates about. And I try to get them to be comfortable with understanding that I work for them, okay? I don't work for the employer. So you're safe telling me exactly what you want. If it's something that excuse me, is like completely out in left field, yes, I will talk to you about that, try to rein in those expectations. But at the end of the day, it's important for somebody like myself in this relationship to know exactly what you want so that I can do my best to achieve it for you, okay? And showcase your achievements with pride. This is something that I see a lot of candidates fail to do, all right? If you've got a history or a record of being rewarded for your achievements, or you did something great in the workforce and you got some kind of recognition, some type of certificate, even thank yous, whatever. You led some type of project that was very successful. You need to be able to articulate those things, all right? And don't be shy about it, okay? You should be proud of those achievements, and especially if they align with something that the employer is looking for. When you give that answer, you give that example, if you could talk about how you were recognized for doing that, just that type of work, that's how you increase your value again, okay? Again, it's the real world experiences, the real world criteria that you have from the workplace, right? The things that you've done, those are the examples that you need to put forth in this early on in that process to get that recognition and to make yourself stand out. And again, it all ties into increasing your value. Okay, so why partner with Higher Power? Now, this image here is not, obviously, it's not the Higher Power logo. This is the logo for a company that I am working on right now. It's a startup company called Offer First. And the reason I'm showing it to you all, this is probably the first audience that has, one of the first candidate audiences that has seen this logo, is because I'm promising all of you that you're going to see a lot more of this within the next year or two, okay? Now, at Higher Power, again, prior to doing this, I was the vice president of DVM recruiting for one of the biggest veterinary medical groups in the country. During my time there, I led their recruiting team to over, I believe it was over 1,200 DVM hires in just 2 years. Okay, so that's an incredible number. I've been in the recruiting space for over 20 years in different industries. And the one thing that I know for a fact is that candidates need somebody who represents their interests, okay? Now, just to dive into this a little more, the reason that I talk about the difference in having somebody represent your interests is because what most candidates don't realize is that when you engage an employer directly, okay, whether it's through an online application, maybe a phone call, text message, whatever the case is, when that employer's recruiter reaches out to you and you respond and you're talking to them, that recruiter, their job is to build a relationship with you, okay? And I know this because I was the one teaching them to do this, okay? Their job is to build a relationship with you. And it's not insincere, okay? These folks absolutely do care about you, they care about your career, but what you have to understand is that their job is to represent the interests of their company, okay? And what that means is, let's say they've got a budget of $100,000 to fill a position. They convince you to take it for $85,000. Well, they're going to turn around and high five each other and celebrate that because they saved their company $15,000, okay? My job is very different. My job is to get you that $100,000, okay? My job is to make sure no money is left on the table and that you are compensated for what you are truly worth. My interest is in you versus when you engage the employer directly, their interest is to represent their company, all right? Their company is always going to come first. And I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing, right? And I'm not saying that the relationship that they establish with you is under false pretenses. That's not it at all. But at the end of the day, you just have to remember, they have to represent the interests of the company first, all right? So that's the biggest, one of the key differences between working with somebody like me and Higher Power versus going through the employer directly, all right? Next thing is that we invented the Offer First process. And this is probably going to be the most impactful part of this presentation for all of you, okay? This is where knowing your value really comes to the table. Because what I want you to think about is the traditional hiring process that I'm sure many of you have gone through, right? where let's say you're interested in a position, you apply online, okay? You applying, going through that application process is the first step in which you have to give your personal time to the employer, okay? And as a vet tech professional, as any veterinary professional, right? Your personal time is valuable, okay? You put in tons of hours at work. You put in 110% of your effort at work, right? So your personal time is extremely valuable to you, right? You want to make sure that you utilize it smartly, right? And we don't want to just give it away for nothing. But if you think again about that traditional process, you're applying up front, giving that personal time, and you don't know what's going to happen at the end. You don't even know if they're going to make you a decent offer, okay? So the next step is going to be a phone call, right? Maybe they get your application and somebody gives you a call a couple days later, maybe a week later. Great, you get really excited. You maybe have a series of phone calls with different people. That's more of your personal time. Then a couple days will go by, maybe another week or so, and wow, they invite you out for an interview. If you're local, great, you're just going to drive over. If you're not, maybe you're going to pack a bag, spend a night or two in a hotel room. Again, more of your personal time. And then at the very end, what happens? This is the moment we're all waiting for, right? This is the moment that you prepared through those interviews, right? You walked into those interviews dressed to the nines, you sat up straight, you used all the right words, you answered their questions perfectly, and you did so thinking that if you checked all those boxes, you're going to get a higher offer, right? If I sit straight, if I use the right answers, or if I use the right words and I say everything perfectly, I'm going to get a better offer. That's what you're thinking. It's just not true, folks. 9 times out of 10, they know what they're going to pay you before you even walk in the door, okay? And then what ends up happening is you've already given them all this personal time of yours. And then at the very, very end, they're going to say, well, this is what you're worth to us, okay? This is essentially the offer, right? It's them demonstrating to you how they value you, all right? Now, if that number doesn't align with the value you placed on yourself or what you're trying to achieve, and you decline that position, well, all that time you gave to the employer is wasted. You don't get it back. It's gone, right? And then what happens? You have to start all over with another employer. And let's hope it works out the second time, because if not, you're going to go through another lengthy process, get another low ball offer at the very end, and you're going to decline it, and you're going to keep doing that. And it's a vicious cycle, okay? What I invented here with Higher Power is this offer first process, where with me, I'm going to work with employers that are going to tell you up front what your offer is going to be, okay? It's going to include your base pay. It's going to include any bonuses like sign-ons or relocation. It's going to contain your vacation time, CE time, CE allowance, all those things, okay? What's going to happen is I'm going to call you and I'm going to say, hey, look, here's the offer from ABC employer. Do you like this? Is this worth your time, okay? And only if you approve that do you start the traditional process of the phone calls and interviews, all right? So basically, I'm flipping the entire process on its head, and I'm benefiting my candidates with it. So it starts with essentially a profile, very simple profile. It'll take you less than 5 minutes to complete, where you tell me what you're looking for, okay, in terms of compensation and location and the type of job. You tell me exactly what you're looking for. I go out, find an employer willing to give it to you, or my job is to get you as close to, if not more than what you're asking, all right? If you like the offer that they make up front, I will get that documented, right? So there's no mistakes, no errors. Both you and the employer will sign it. Now, the document is not binding. It's not saying that you're going to take the job. It's just saying, here are the numbers that we agreed to up front. And then you go through the interview process. Now, think about this. Think about that person who went through the traditional process and sat up straight, used all the right words, right? And had all this pressure, this self-perceived pressure on themselves to perform in the interview. What they are not doing is being their natural selves, okay? You're being this best foot forward version of yourself. And when you do that and you put that pressure on yourself, you really don't perform in a natural state. And the other problem that happens is that you don't get a really good opportunity to focus on interviewing them. assessing the employer, assessing their environment, their team, right? How they interact with each other, their processes, because you're so focused on yourself. You're so focused on making sure everything you do is perfect. And why are you doing that? Because in your mind, you think you're going to get a better offer. But utilizing my process, you're not going to have to worry about that because you're going to go into that interview already knowing what you're going to get paid. You've already agreed to it. You're already happy with that offer. So now you go in and you're able to be yourself. You can be natural. You get to assess the employer, right? Because interviewing, it should be a two-way street. But unfortunately, most candidates are so focused on performing and demonstrating that they are the best person for the job that they don't get the ability to assess the employer, okay? But with this process, it's going to be completely off the table. That problem is no longer exists. And now you get to assess them and they get a better assessment of the natural you, okay? And that, folks, that fit is really critical when finding a new job because what we don't want to do is bounce around every couple months, right? We want to find something that we like and stick with it, okay? And there's no better way to do it than this offer first process. I already talked about how much time is wasted or potentially wasted in the traditional process. And primarily it's because you're giving all that personal time up front and you don't know what the offer is going to be at the end. But with us, you've already seen the offer, you like the offer, you've approved it. So now the only time we're risking is whether we don't fit at this place or not, right? If you don't like their equipment, if you don't like their environment, well then fine. I'm going to decline the offer because of that, but it's not going to be because of some arbitrary value that somebody else placed upon it, okay? And I'll tell you right now, the general average across all industries in the United States for offer acceptance is only 60 to 65%, which means 40 to 45% of offers are being declined. Using this process for the last 2 years, like I have, my offer acceptance rate is 98%, which is just an incredible improvement over the industry norm. All right, so you can rest assured that utilizing this process, there's a good chance that when I match you with an employer, it's going to be one that you want to stay with. All right. I talked about the interview experience and, of course, your confidence. Your confidence throughout the process is going to be much higher. Okay. Because you're going to go in there knowing that this employer is willing to pay you what you're worth. All right. And not just their opinion of what you're worth, but your opinion of what you're worth. All right. That's my job, is to find that match. Okay. So having said all that, I will go ahead and see if we have any questions real quick before I close this out.
We do have a question, Paul, and thank you for that presentation, by the way. Question is, does this method assist with avoiding being a number of a group that an employer feels or is required to fill before interviews can be held or before they'll select?
Jess, could you say that first part one more time? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, of course. Does this method assist with avoiding being a number of a group that an employer feels or is required to fill before interviews can be held or before they'll select, i.e. schools, federal jobs where jobs remain listed until 6 people or so are in a pool of applicants?
Yeah, so there are going to be, if you're applying for a federal job, now here's the thing, those jobs are regulated by what's called the OFCCP, that's the Office of Federal Contractor Compliance Programs. In a previous role of mine, I was actually a subject matter expert in recruiting compliance. And the thing about those is, no, you're not going to be, I wouldn't be able to represent you in that type of regulated position because the OFCCP requires those employers to treat all candidates the same. So that would mean that I would have to be representing every single candidate, and that's just not, it's not reasonable. It's just never going to happen. So those regulated type employers, they're going to have a very, very structured process that every single candidate has to follow. Okay. So if you're going after a government position like that, then yeah, I wouldn't be able to help in that matter, at least not yet, until I get the recognition for this software through the OFCCP. And that's going to be years down the road. But right now, if you're going after the traditional type employers that are not government contractors, then generally those folks are just happy to get an applicant period, and they're not waiting for a total number of people before they move forward with interviews.
The follow-up comment was, she's been told her interview was great, but they had already leaned towards someone and encouraged her to apply again. Thank you for the answer. Oh, another question. Here we go. How does one determine their worth? Oh, I was thinking the same thing, Terry. Given the current low wage average for veterinary technicians, what skill set will be valued most? And how much is each skill worth?
Okay, so it's not, there's no value, there's no dollar amount for, like, if you're FearFree certified, I can't tell you that you're going to make $5,000 more a year, right? There's no value, no solid dollar amount that can be applied to an individual skill set, okay? But what you can do though, basically it makes you more competitive in the space. And when you're more competitive, you're more valuable. Okay. Now, how do you determine what you're worth? Right. Well, that is a very personal question. And yes, I understand that there is a currently very low wage average for veterinary technicians. And here's the thing, there's a very specific reason why it's low. It's because the majority of veterinary technicians will accept it. It is basically that simple. When you think about this, the veterinary medical groups or even private practices, majority, if not the majority of the revenue that they raise is off the backs of their veterinarians, and then another piece off of their veterinary technicians, okay? Most of it, again, is off the veterinarians. But here's the thing. The number one question I get from veterinarians when they're going into a new job or they're thinking of getting a new job is, how many vet techs do they have? What's their vet tech staffing like, right? So veterinarians understand the importance of the work vet techs do. I think all employers do. And yeah, I'll just tell you all very candidly, I think that the compensation, the low wage compensation that techs get for the level of experience that you guys have, for the education, the training that you all have, I think it's woefully inadequate, all right? But the thing is that it's not gonna change until the masses understand that your value is so much higher than what they're compensating you with, right? And the only way that happens is through things like this, right? My opportunities for me to get in front of folks, and I'll tell you, I've been doing this with veterinarians and vet schools for the last 12, 18 months. And I'm trying to articulate to them, trying to get this point across that, you know, these employers are going to hire you. They need you. They can't survive without you. You just have to be willing to hold off. And right now, that potentially is a problem, because if you held off, right, there's going to be somebody else that will take that low wage position. But eventually it all washes out, because those folks that are taking those low wage positions, those are usually the ones that are going to end up washing out later on down the road, or don't have the skill sets that you may have. All right. And the employer will end up recognizing that later on down the road. But this is a much broader industry-wide type conversation that needs to occur, but it really does start at the grassroots level. It starts at the individual level, saying, hey, you know what? No, I'm not going to take this job here for $14, $13 an hour when I can work at this fast food restaurant right next door and make 16 bucks an hour. Like, it just doesn't make sense, right? So that's what I do, folks. I understand it's an uncomfortable conversation for some people, but I am the one in the relationship, right? In the hiring relationship, I negotiate for my candidates. Okay, so that's what higher power does. And this offer first software will do when it's automated, when it goes live. We will help you with that negotiation piece. You're going to enter in, you're going to say what you want, right? And what you want is going to have to be against something that's commensurate with the market, right? So if you know that, hey, this employer, this veterinary employer is only paying like 13 bucks an hour, but all other employers in your area whose requirements are significantly less, right? Fast food, retail, they don't have to have the certifications and education that you have. But if they're all paying 16, 17, there's something wrong, right? And I'll be the one who articulates that for you. And you know what? Yes, it's going to be a very, very small incremental change. But you know what? If I can make it one person at a time, at least somebody's trying, right? We got to start somewhere. I know that was a really long answer to that question. I'm sorry.
No, I appreciate it. Oh, follow up. Also, I presume that if you defer health insurance and other benefits, that is a method to garner a higher hourly wage. As a retiree, I won't need those benefits.
It actually isn't. Some employers may, but most won't, right? Because it's not a direct dollar for dollar offset, right? And there's different tax implications. So it's not like the employer, let's say, puts in, I don't know, $3,500 a year towards your benefits. You say you don't need benefits, so that means you're going to get $3,500 extra on your salary. It just doesn't work that way. Some employers might, most don't.
Right. I have a question too, while we're waiting to see if anyone else does, if you don't mind. Have you worked with someone who like just graduated and was looking for a job? Like a vet tech that just
Vet
graduated?
techs or veterinary?
Either or.
Yes.
Yes. So like personally for me, when I first started my job hunting experience, I didn't know what I wanted. So I'm assuming like and I think this is kind of, I feel like this is what it was aiming towards too, is like you're advocating for that person, but like, how do they know what they want? Like, are you guiding them towards that? Or are you telling them like, you should hold out for a different offer? Like kind of thing, like if they're new to if they don't know.
Well, when you say you don't know what you want in terms of just compensation specifically, or in terms of the type of job, the type of environment, or all of it?
If they don't know what's fair, like for their position, if they don't know, and it might, I don't know if going back to the word worth is what I'm looking for, but if they come out of school and they have this degree and they are going into their job and they don't know what the average is. Like you can look it up and all that, but do they really know what they're supposed to be getting, or are they just going off like, do you know where I'm going with this?
I got it 100%. And I'm glad you brought up that point about looking it up. So I want you all to be very careful with looking up compensation rates online, because that information is purely survey based. And the margin of error is through the roof on that, okay? It is something that I'm working on correcting through Offer First as well, but I won't dive into that right now. But yes, if I'm working with a new grad who just does not understand what they're worth, what their value is in the marketplace, with no experience whatsoever, just completing training, right? Yes, that's where I can help, right? So number one, the first thing I'm going to want to ask is, what type of position are you looking for, right? Once I understand the job title or job titles that kind of fit your purview, next thing I'm going to ask is where? What locations are you open to? And here's the thing, folks. If you want to maximize your earning potential, and I know this can be difficult for some, but if you want to maximize your earning potential, be open with location preferences, okay? The more flexibility you have with location preferences, the higher your opportunity is to gain really high compensation, okay? And it's the candidates that tell me, I only want to work in San Diego, or I only want to work in Austin, Texas, right? Those are the ones, number one, it's a little more difficult to find them that position, but they're also the ones that are relatively victim to what that market is, right? But if you're open and you're able to relocate just about anywhere, and think about this, it's not something that you have to do long-term, right? If you could get out of school, get that training, and let's say you take a position in a rural part of the country at a small private practice, where that practice owner is vested in your success, right? And the mentorship isn't a checklist-based program like most of these major medical groups are touting, right? They've got all these great marketing materials and beautiful images and all this stuff about their mentorship programs. folks, I was there. I saw the design of these programs. I know what's going on. And essentially what's going to end up happening is they're going to get your butt in the seat. Somebody's going to go through a checklist of things. Once they get a check in the box, they're going to submit that. Your mentorship is over. All right, you're probably never even going to see that person again. But at the private practice level, small group level, these folks are vested in your success. Your success is their success, right? So let's say you took that position at some rural location. It's not the best spot, right? Like, for example, I've got an employer in Yuma, Arizona, who pays veterinarians, not even full-time work, 350 grand a year base, okay? They don't even put in 40 hours a week, okay? Their technicians are some of the highest paid technicians I've ever seen. And most of them just fly in. He provides boarding, right? He's got a big old bunch of houses that they can stay in. They stay there for 2 weeks, they go home for 2 weeks, they come back. And they're just raking in the dough. It's positions like that, right? Where you can get a really high compensation early in your career, but what it does more for you is it gives you the experience. So after doing that for a few years, 2 to 3 years, now all these other doors across the country open up for you. And now when you apply for that job in your hometown, you're going to be the most competitive candidate instead of the candidate who just got out of school, okay? So there's a lot of different strategies for doing this. But again, if you don't know, that's what I'm here for, because I know what the markets are across this country. And I'll be able to kind of set those expectations for you and really help you find what's going to be right for you. But lastly, folks, I can't belabor this point enough. The more open you are to locations, the better you'll do.
I think that's something that, yeah, a lot of people need to realize and recognize, is that you have to work your way up sometimes, especially when you're a grad, like a new grad. You have to work. You're not going to get your dream job right away.
No.
You know, so yes.
If you're willing to sacrifice just a little for a few years, if you're willing to sacrifice your comfort for a couple of years to kind of catapult your career, then you just want your sky's the limit for you. It really will be.
It's perfect. That's great. No, it really is. Does anyone have any other questions or anything? Or let me check Facebook. Or any other comments or anything? Because I really appreciate you taking the time today, Paul,
Absolutely.
to go through all of this with us. Even though I'm not a vet tech, the knowledge is still, it's good things to know, learn something new every day.
Absolutely.
And I still, when we met the first time and we were going over things, and you told me the story about the person who took you outside and pointed to the sign and said, like, I could be working there for,
yep,
for much more. I told that to my sister, who's a vet tech, and she's like, that's a very good point. I should go work there instead.
There you go.
So, no, I appreciate you taking the time today. And if no one has any more questions, we might be able to, how does one get a hold of Paul?
Smoke signals.
Smoke signals.
Just send up a smoke signal. My email address, maybe I should pull it back up again. Well, paul.diaz@higherpower.com. And it's HIRE. All right, so paul.diaz, there it is. So you just shoot me an email there if you are actively looking for a new position, or if you even if you know somebody who is. And I understand this audience is mostly tech educators, so you're going to have a lot of technicians going through your program. If you want me to speak at your program, I'd be more than happy to. If you want me to be a resource for your alumni or your future students, I'll be more than happy to. And this is, like I said, folks, this is where we as a team can start to shift the industry towards ensuring that these dedicated technicians are paid a wage that they can live a good lifestyle on, right? And they don't, what breaks my heart is that technician who puts his or her heart and soul into getting this education, getting this training, taking these jobs, and then has to drive Uber at night or work somewhere else at night, right? To keep the bills paid and keep the lights on. That's what breaks my heart the most, right? And if I can help stop that, that'll help me sleep better at night as well. So folks, if there's anything I can do for your students, for you, please reach out to me. All right. Even if it's hosting another webinar with your organization or the students that you teach, whatever the case is,
Mhm.
I want to help. All right. I'm committed to this industry. I'm committed to helping the candidates.
Maybe next year, like I was saying earlier, maybe next year you can speak at our conference.
I would love to.
Nice wide audience, spread the word. But thank you again for taking the time today, Paul, and thank you for everyone who joined us today and your questions. If you happen to lose the email address, you can always email help@avte.net, and I'd be happy to connect you with Paul. But I think that's a wrap. And unless you have any other final pieces of wisdom or anything else you'd like to share, we should be good to call it a day.
I think I'll give everybody the rest of their day back. I appreciate you guys.
Okay.